Chris McCandless was a young American who, after graduating college in 1990, decided to live an alternative lifestyle as a wandering hermit. Surrendering to a higher power to guide him, he traveled from place to place, putting his confidence in the universe to protect him. Born in California, he traveled through Virginia, the Sierra Nevada mountains, and Mexico before venturing to Alaska. Influenced by figures like Jack Kerouac, the Beats, and Henry David Thoreau in his book Walden, McCandless surrendered to his inner impulses, which he felt were coming from the divine. McCandless graduated from Emory College in Georgia with degrees in history and anthropology. Graduating with a significant amount of savings, he imitated a Buddhist or Christian impulse toward renunciation. Like the rich man was told to do in the Bible, McCandless gave all his material wealth away, consciously choosing to live a life of poverty. McCandless grew up in a tumultuous childhood, and one of the books he read that became a refuge for him was The Call of the Wild by Jack London. The book depicted an idealized utopian life in nature, a place where the human being could get more in tune with their authentic self and health. Set in the Yukon Territory, the book played a big role in McCandless traveling to the Alaskan region later. Traveling with little food, insulation, or social support, McCandless put all his worries on the universe to provide for him. In this capacity, recalling the biblical line that one can rely on the divine to do this. In doing this, he was surrendering to a spiritual impulse, which has existed in the human condition for millennia. Whether it's the tale of Myrddin Welt, the Welsh holy man who retired in the wilderness and became the basis for Merlin, the Buddha who gave up his inheritance to live as a beggar or bhikkhu, or Ramana Maharshi, who as a teenager decided to drop out of school and live on a mountain in isolation, the human being has always been drawn to give up a worldly existence in search of a higher truth. When you question the origins of this impulse, we find it arises from a grappling with the human experience. The lives of most people are committed to work, amassing wealth, and pursuing status. Called the Rajasic temperament in the Bhagavad Gita, we live lives of constant stress and turmoil, so we can relieve ourselves in short intervals of sensual pleasure. At the same time, from the Epicurean point of view, we can recognize the vanity even of this, as most of us fall short of the true paradisiacal pleasures that could exist. As the Buddha said, our fates are ultimately sickness, old age, and death, and like Percy Shelley observed, it feels like everything in life is transitory and impermanent. We can conclude with the author of Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. An idealist confronted with the human condition might respond in two ways. First, the impulse toward renunciation spares the individual of at least a good share of human suffering. By giving up the pursuit of pleasure and status, one can self-simplify and try to find joy and contentment in what is naturally arising instead. Second, it frees one to pursue enlightenment. If there is a hidden path to illumination in the human condition, one who embraces a life of voluntary poverty has the most leisure time to try to pursue it. It's this expectation that led to the developments of Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian monasticism. McCandless had some of this spiritual impulse in him. He found virtue in giving up sensual pleasure, highlighting a section on chastity from Thoreau's Walden. At the same time, it appears McCandless's ideal was mostly secular, influenced more by figures like Jack Kerouac in On the Road, preferring a wandering bohemian lifestyle, or Thoreau and Walden, showing a putting of trust in nature as an ideal. As often happens when one enters the religious life, McCandless took a new name to signify his entry into the itinerant lifestyle. Accordingly, he rebranded himself as Alexander Supertramp. There's one line of McCandless that gives us some insight into his psychology. In his diary, he refers to a time he had money and was trying to live the itinerant life. Too easy, he writes. This shows us his ethical system. He's following a form of ethics similar to Nietzsche, which intentionally values hardship as a vehicle for personal growth. This line shows he wants to follow the impulse of renunciation to its extreme and rely on the universe to provide for all his needs. If we consider the logical end of this line of reasoning, we can understand why McCandless ended up in a bus in Alaska at the end of his life, dying of starvation and exposure. This type of moral reasoning assumes a conscious universe. Whether the power is karma, justice, benevolence, or God, a renunciate self-simplifies to the most extreme degree and expects to be provided for. To test this hypothesis, one might be drawn to increasingly more extreme conditions, each time seeing if you would be protected by providence. When in need, something happens. A stranger gives you a coat so you don't freeze. You're picked up on the road right as the frostbite is affecting you. A friend comes to rescue you when they remember you're going hungry in the wilderness. We can find instances of this in history, like in the tale of Ramana Maharshi, when he describes the need for clothing and then is provided a loincloth by a stranger, or in the tale of the Orthodox monk who lived much of his life in the wilderness, St. Herman of Alaska. To add to McCandless's extremism, he expected nothing for himself and didn't want celebrity, not telling people who he was or where he was going. When he met people, he didn't even give his real name. Instead, his pseudonym, Alexander Supertramp. There is a beautiful expression of the impulse McCandless followed in the Greek work called the Philokalia. Originally used for the instruction of monks in the Middle Ages, it instructs the neophyte on the harsh virtues of the ascetic life, giving up attachment for the body and its pleasures. Though McCandless was in Alaska, not Nunavut, the setting is similar to a work that explores a similar theme. The AMC series The Terror, based on Dan Simmons' novel, explores the fate of the Franklin expedition, a group of Arctic explorers who get trapped in the ice above Canada while looking for the Northwest Passage. I've developed a personal fascination with The Terror, and I've been curious why this is. And I think it's because The Terror is a film about what it's like to live on the moon. It explores the human condition in a fundamental way. What if you live in the desert, in an infinite wilderness of ice in which there is no escape? You eat from aging, spoiled provisions, and sit with a crew of only men who follow military discipline. There are no women there, no relationships. You have little opportunity for learning or recreation. You stand with your captain for prayer and wait for God to melt the ice so you can escape and return to ordinary life. What I think I find fascinating about The Terror is it's about a group of people forced into a monastic condition. They're put in a limited circumstance of life without a higher material potential, only survival. And this raises the question of what to do with this. So this is the existential human state. And we ask, like the Hindu yogis, is there samadhi, the religious experience, enlightenment? Or is the imagery of the film what is affirmed? That without a higher material purpose, we're trapped in a bleak nihilism, not much better than animals, eating whatever calories we can get to stay alive, even denying the humanity or spiritual nature of others as we slowly turn to cannibalism. So we've identified a recurring theme that emerged out of the counterculture of the United States, that we have these figures who appear and challenge the normative American value of work, offering a bohemian lifestyle as an alternative. I find it interesting how rare this impulse is in the American consciousness. It does appear as a pattern, but its rarity shows the United States is a fundamentally material civilization. It shows the Protestant work ethic and the ideals of productivity are well internalized by society. One of the bleaker manifestations of this impulse occurs in the story of Timothy Treadwell, who appears in Werner Herzog's documentary of his life, Grizzly Man. Spending life in the Katmai Peninsula of Alaska, Treadwell presented himself as a naturalist, studying and building a close relationship with bears, like Jane Goodall did with chimpanzees, articulating a desire to protect them. Despite this, Treadwell was told repeatedly by the authorities not to camp in the bears' territory or to accustom them to human interaction. He ignored this advice and developed an idealistic sense of the bear's nature, thinking he was able to develop personal relationships with them. One argument is Treadwell had an inner conflict over his sexuality, and this led to risk-taking and a death wish, similar to the death by cop phenomenon, which manifested in him doing increasingly extreme behaviors, like going camping amongst the bears until they ended his life. If we compare Treadwell with McCandless, we can't say that McCandless had the same reckless motivation that Treadwell did. He wasn't motivated by an internalized feeling of self-hatred. Instead, he was drawn to the wilderness in pursuit of a higher freedom. The tragedy of McCandless's life lies in that his idealistic impulse towards self-simplification led to him perishing in the wilderness. If we observe a historical pattern, McCandless fits in a tradition of others who submitted to inner guides, like Joan of Arc or Francis of Assisi. What we find is though these individuals become hyper-confident of themselves, believing they're subject to a higher power, their fates are often martyrdom, like Joan of Arc, or dying of exposure, like Francis of Assisi. So I think this instinct for renunciation comes from a deep place in the human psyche. Like in the mouse utopia, there's a revulsion toward the competitiveness and Darwinism of physical existence. A renunciate is an idealist who seeks to break out of the vain quest for status and power, seeking happiness and a higher human relationship with the universe. Since his death, McCandless has become a popular figure in the American consciousness, giving him a mystique and putting him in the same category as figures like Thoreau and Jack Kerouac. He embodies a rare expression of the American experience, a desire to transcend material abundance, to find a higher truth that lies within.